What's up, everybody? This is Teacher Shay, and I will be your reporter for today. And for this week's topic, we are going to discuss about the different generational types. Before we move on, let's define generation. What do we mean by generation? According to Center for Generational Kinetics, generation is a group of people born at the same time and raised at the same place. People in this birth cohort exhibit the same characteristics, preferences, and values over their lifetimes. According to the sociologist Carl Meinheim, generation comes down to general location. It means members of the same generation share the same collective experiences. To simplify, when we talk about generations, we're talking about the birth years of those people and not their ages. We have different generational types, and these are the GI generation, the traditionalist, the baby boomers, the generation X, the generation Y, and the generation Z. GI generations are those born in 1924 or earlier. Tom Brokaw coined the term the greatest generation as a tribute to Americans who lived through the Great Depression and then fought in World War II. His 1998 best-selling book, The Greatest Generation, popularized the term. The traditionalists, or also known as silent generations, were those born in 1945 and before. A 1951 essay in Time magazine dubbed the people in this age group the silent generation because they were more cautious than their parents. The silent generation helped shape 20th century pop culture with pioneering rock musicians, iconic filmmakers, television legends, beat poets, gonzo journalists, and groundbreaking political satirists. This generation is so-called always respect your elders generation. They are more respectful to authorities and elders. They gave birth to those in the next generation. The next up, baby boomers. Born in 1946 to 1964, or sometimes listed as 1943 to 1964. Why do you think are they called baby boomers? Yeah, you guessed it right. It was during this time when lots of babies were born. This was during the post-World War II, wherein most of the soldiers came home and made babies. They had a great impact on economy. They have plenty of collective experiences. The Vietnam War, Cold War, the Red Scare, Civil Rights Movement, Hippie Movement, the moon landing, and so on. Baby boomers are the biggest consumers of traditional media, like television, radio, magazines, and newspapers. Despite being so traditional, 90% of the baby boomers own a Facebook account. They made a wide range of characteristics and values. They started to be liberal and became more conservative as they grew older. And then the beginning of the generations with the letters, the Generation X. Born from 1965 to 1976, or sometimes listed as 1965 to 1979. They used X because this generation was undetermined yet. They didn't have a blatant cultural identifier, thus the letter X. This generation experienced the aftermath of the events created by the baby boomers. The Generation X felt lost between the two major generations. However, this generation started using the computer. Gen X still reads newspapers, magazines, and listens to the radio and watches TV. However, they are also digitally savvy and spend roughly 7 hours a week on Facebook, the highest of any generational cohort. Gen X are more entrepreneurial than their parents and grandparents. They are also peer-oriented since most of their parents are in the workforce. Crack epidemic and AIDS crisis happened in this generation. Gen X is trying to raise a family, pay debts, and take care of their aging parents. These demands put their resources on strain. So what comes after X? You're right, Generation Y, or also known as the Millennials. It was in 1989 when Neil Howe and William Strauss coined the term when the millennium began to feature in the cultural consciousness. This is the most controversial generation and it gets a lot of bashing and criticisms. Millennials are born in between 1977 and 1995. They are described as selfish, titled, narcissistic, and others. However, we cannot blame them. They are just taking advantage of the technology. It was in this generation when the internet explodes. 5% of this generation still watches TV, but most of them are relying on internet. Despite the negative descriptions, millennials are more group-oriented than their predecessors. And finally, the Gen Z. It has the most labels such as Centennials, Gen Tech, Post-Millennial, iGeneration, and Gen Wi-Fi. Gen Zs are born in 1996 up to present. Members of this generation are the heavy users of mobile devices. The average Gen Z received their first mobile phone at age 10.3 years old. Many of them grew up playing with their parents' mobile phones or tablets. They have grown up in a hyper-connected world and the smartphone is their preferred method of communication. On average, they spend 3 hours a day on their mobile device. They have internet access at a very young age. This generation has seen the struggle of millennials and has adopted a more fiscally conservative approach. They start to learn about personal finance. They are financially literate and open savings account at a young age than the previous generations. Like the millennials, they also expect other things to happen quickly, like responding to emails and text messages. Gen X parents are more restrictive with the use of their children's devices, while millennial parents are more lenient with the use of gadgets. Gen Z values collaboration more. Why do we need to learn these generational types? As educators of young learners, we need to see the characteristics of these different generations. We might encounter them in our everyday teaching and learning process. Our young learners belong to Generation Z. Their parents or their guardians belong to Generation X or Y. Their grandparents belong to the baby boomers. If we know their characteristics and their collective experiences, it's easy for us to deal with them. Our young learners know how to use technology, and as teachers of these young learners, we should also learn how to adapt to these technologies. Our teaching strategies and approaches should also match the needs and demands of these young learners. We should make their learning more fun and interesting by incorporating these technologies. With the new normal that we are facing right now, it is a great relief that our students know how to deal with these technologies. They know how to use computers, mobile devices, different gadgets, and the internet. Gen Z learners are independent, competitive, and know how to multitask. As teachers, we should cater to these characteristics of our learners. With what we learned, I hope that we become more understanding of the different people in the different generations. Remember that these behaviors are affected by the different collective experiences that they have. May this lesson help us in dealing the different people that we meet in our teaching and learning environment. Happy teaching!